Hey everyone, Sam here. I'm recording in a bit of a bigger space today, so I thought I'd use my smaller mic just to make sure that the audio is clear. So I'm super excited to talk to y'all today about my second book that I'm currently in the process of writing. So as a bit of background before I get started talking about my new book, for those of you who don't know, I'm a published author and my book is called The Coding Workbook. Build a website with HTML and CSS. And this was traditionally published by No Starch Press in December of 2021. And it took about 2 years, from thinking about the book to writing it to getting it published. And so I'll kind of break down that journey in the next few videos. But the process for writing this current book that I'm working on is actually pretty much the exact same as the writing process that I used to write my first book. And so I'll kind of be breaking that down for you in this video. The book that I'm going to be writing next is actually a course building workbook. So teaching people how to build a course from end to end, if they have an idea for a course they want to build, and pretty much how to take it to launch and publish. So the writing process that I've taken so far for this book has consisted of 3 steps. So the first step is creating my outline. My second step is creating my draft of all of the outline content, and the third step is editing. So when it comes to outlining my books, because they are more instructional and they're sequential, because they are workbooks where I'm teaching something, I want to make sure that I think about 3 things. The first thing that I want to think about is the topic, and so that kind of comes naturally based on me reflecting on what I like writing about. The second thing I like to think about is my audience. So who am I writing this book for? Who do I think will benefit from it? And kind of hone in on that. And the third thing I like to think about is the objective or the outcome of the book. Like, what do I want my learners or my readers to really get out of this book? Do I want them to be able to create something by the end? Do I want them to know certain things by the end of the book? And I think about those 3 things as I'm creating my outline. Alrighty, everyone. Welcome to my blank Word document that I'm going to be using to be creating my outline. So for this example, I kind of wanted to show you a little bit about what I was talking about when I was talking about how I went about setting up an outline. So to start, we'll add a title to our document, and this will be Course Building Workbook Outline. I'll add that here. I'll add the title. And then I will want to come up with the topic. I will want to come up with the audience and the outcome or the objective of the book. So for this, I'll start with the topic. The topic of this book is about how to take an idea and turn it into an online course. The audience for this course is professionals who want to take an idea or topic that they are well versed in and to take an idea or topic that they're well versed in and turn it into a well-constructed online course. So by completing this workbook, readers will have outlined, drafted, written, and launched an online course. The course will be created using best instructional design / course building practices to ensure that the learners are engaged and have a great experience taking the course. Okay, something like that. So now we have that, and that is kind of the basis of before we start outlining. We want to make sure that we get that together. Okay, now I can start to build the outline. So now that I'm creating my outline, I start to think about, okay, what is the sequence of things that my reader needs in order to achieve this goal or this outcome? I like to think about the steps going from very simple, high level, more overview content, and then it gets more specific and a little bit more difficult and more narrowed in as they go through the workbook. So for me, for example, because I'm building a course building workbook, I'm going to start with my intro where I talk more about high level concepts. I talk about vocabulary and I talk about kind of what's going to be in the book. And then I'm going to outline all the steps that my reader will need to go through and learn about and complete in order to build and launch their course. I'm going to divide my book into 3 sections. So section 1, I think section 1 will be plan your course, and section 2 will be draft your course, and section 3 will be either create or launch your course. Okay. So these will be the 3 main sections of my book, and that kind of gives me a starting point for how I'm going to break up the content. So I can start to then think about how I want, or what types of content I would want to go in section 1, where I talk about planning the course, then what types of content I would want to put here in drafting my course, and then what types of content I would put in section 3 about creating and launching my course. So it's always great when you start writing an outline, at least in either a section 0 or section 1, you want to give an overview of terms or language you'll be using in the book. If it's a more instructional book or if it's like a workbook, sometimes it's nice to give a bit of definition and a bit of context up front. You don't always have to do that, but it is nice to do. We'll actually make each of these into chapters. So this will be chapter 1, and then here we'll do chapter 2, and then we'll do chapter 3. Same for here. Chapter 4. See how not intimidating this looks now? It's we're breaking it down, we're starting small. This is totally doable. And then you can do a conclusion, or like a summary section, something like that. All right, so look, this is basically how I would go about creating my outline. Say I wanted to start filling in, what each chapter would be about, I can create subpoints. So here we go. Say I have overview of the terms and languages I'll be using in the book. I can then get a little bit more specific and start to think about some terms, like course. For my example, because I'm writing a course building workbook, I'll want to define the course audience, course outcomes, learning objectives. I'll want to define assessments, I think that's how you spell it, assessments, engagement, and so I'm gonna, these are all different things that will want to have in chapter 1. So yeah, this is kind of how I'm going to go about outlining my book. Remember, we want to start with the topic, the audience, and the outcome or the objective, so that we make sure that as we're writing and as we're outlining, we can always refer back to these and make sure that we're kind of aligning with our objective and like what we want to get out of this book, so that we're not just kind of going astray and just writing a bunch of random things, because everyone knows a lot of stuff, but in order for the book to be like cohesive and get to the point and not have a bunch of extra fluff, you want to make sure that you're just kind of like staying the course with this learning outcome. Okay. All right. Back to the video. So always be open to your outline changing, because as you're starting to write your outline and create it, realize that certain things need to be moved up and down, and that's totally fine. Your outline is definitely just a draft, mostly a brain dump of ideas. If you're struggling to come up with an outline, something I like to do is just a brain dump. I like to take all the ideas about the topic that I know, and I write them down on a paper, and I try to organize them into some sort of logical order that might make sense to a reader. It doesn't always have to be perfect, but just having some sort of brain dump is really important, just getting everything out on paper. I actually read a quote recently in a book that I was reading that said something about how fixing things and editing things is much easier than actually creating things, and I think that point is so important when it comes to starting writing. You just kind of have to get started, put anything on paper, and then editing it is so much easier than taking that first step to get started. So once I've written my outline, then I get to drafting, and this drafting part takes me months. For this current book, it's taken me like a year, because I work full time, and writing my book sometimes isn't exactly what I want to be doing at the end of each day, but I do try to at least write a few sentences per day. So one tip for writing is, once you have your outline, I feel that if you are really familiar with the content, you don't necessarily need to go and write out your draft in sequential order. Sometimes I'm really feeling writing about one topic, and so I'll hop around through my outline and start to write out the content for that. I think it's important to try to stick with a routine, but don't punish yourself if you're not able to commit to it, because you want this to be a fun experience, and sometimes you do need a break. Alrighty, so now let's go ahead and start to draft. So I have my outline set up, and I'm going to draft my book in the same document by inserting where's page break? Page break. All right, so this will be the start of my draft. All right, so we'll start with section 1, chapter 1. Copy that, and I will paste it here. All right, section 1, chapter 1. We'll just go ahead and do that. Alrighty, so as you're drafting and you start a new chapter, you want to make sure that the first thing you do is you write kind of an opening sentence. So I'll go ahead and do that. So in this chapter, we'll cover the terminology that we will be using in this book, period. All right. You may have heard of these terms before, but we'll cover the specific definitions as they will apply to the book. All right, so then I will take these and we'll go ahead and get started. So I don't want these to actually look like a list, so I'll go ahead and separate them out. So now I'll go into like the body of the chapter where I'm actually building out the content. I'll be giving the definitions of each of these. So let's go ahead and just format it just for my liking. Okay, so I'll start with defining each of these, and then I also will want to maybe give an example. So the audience of your course is a group of people you've identified that will be taking your course. Your audience can be based on skill level, interest, job title, let's say maybe career field, etc. All right, and then I'm just spitballing here. This isn't the actual what I'll be writing, but now we'll give an example. So maybe the audience of the course is early career graphic designers who have 1 to 2 years of experience with Adobe Illustrator. Okay, so this could be like an example of a course audience. So I'll go through and I'll continue giving the definitions and adding examples for each. Let's see, we'll just set this up. Example, and then here, and here we go. So once I've written kind of the body of chapter 1, then I'll want to make sure that I add a sentence at the end to kind of wrap everything up. Now that you've become familiar with the terminology of the book, let's move on to chapter 2, and then I'll just include the title, where you'll be doing, X, Y, and Z. I don't have the name for chapter 2 quite yet, but I always want to make sure that I have some sort of like wrap-up sentence that helps you transition into the next chapter. So that's kind of what I would do for section 1. Let's go ahead and just make this a title, and we'll make this a heading 1. Just for organization purposes, and so when you're building out your table of contents, you can kind of create it easier and like anchor everything to it. So now I don't need the word draft. We'll get rid of that. We'll make this title. And then I will start with chapter 2. So we'll you can add a page break for each if you want. So I would go to insert, break, page break, and then I would add chapter 2. Now we'll go to chapter 2, and here's the title of chapter 2. And I would start to draft that out again with an introduction sentence, kind of a bit of context to what you're writing. Then you want to add the body of content, and then a wrap-up / summary. And that's kind of the little formula that I'll be using as I draft out each chapter. For me, the drafting stage is when things get really fun, because then I can start to kind of see my book coming to life, and I can start seeing the content take shape, and I can, realize that I put something totally out of order and it might need to be moved down a little bit. But, it does take time, and chipping away at it a little bit at a time, or when you're really feeling in the mood to write, just staying consistent in writing, that's super important. Some things that I like to do if I'm having a brain block or writer's block is maybe I like to design the cover of the book, or I'll come up with mock-ups of the cover of the book. You can also print out the existing content that you've already written and maybe handwrite onto the pages for a little bit. I've definitely done that before with my previous book. I got to page like 90 and I printed out a few of the pages where I still had empty spaces, and I just hand wrote on it, and it made it a lot easier. I just took it to the library and started writing. So that's another tip. So it's been about a year since I've been drafting my book, and I want to say I'm about 80 to 90% done. It's hitting almost 100 pages, and I think what I'm going to be doing, because I am actually struggling to write and finish the last 2 chapters, I am going to print out the last 4 chapters of the book, and I just have a bunch of blank space on the last 2 chapters, and so I am going to be handwriting the chapters, because I can't be staring at this document anymore. I've been staring at it for a year, and I'm I'm over looking at this same document. So I think at this point I am going to be using my own strategy and printing it out to write on it. I think that'll help me get over this like final hurdle. But yeah, so that's kind of the process for me so far. I've done this exact same process for my published book. The next thing that I'm going to be working on is editing, and that is going to be a whole video in itself because editing a book is a whole different beast. There's certain things that I look for when I'm editing, and there's different strategies that I use when I'm editing, and I kind of want to make another video about how to edit a draft of a book because I think that could be helpful to people. But if you have any questions, feel free to post them down below. I'd be happy to respond to them and kind of let you know based on my experience with my second book, writing my second book. I'm also going to be creating another video about, traditional publishing versus self-publishing. My first book was traditionally published by a publisher, but I'm kind of going back and forth between whether or not I want to, pitch this current book to another company or if I want to self-publish. And I'm going to be talking about the pros and cons of traditional versus self-publishing in a later video. So if you're interested in that, feel free to subscribe because I'm going to be talking all about, this book writing journey as I'm going through it. I'm literally going through it right now. I'm finishing up writing this book and my goal is to get it done and out this year. So I'm super excited to take you all on this journey. And yeah, if you have any other questions, feel free to comment them down below. Feel free to subscribe, and I'll talk to y'all next time. Bye. Another tip, if you are having trouble getting started writing an outline or even getting started writing, is to put on, this is what works for me. I put on television and sometimes trash television, and I take out my iPad or my notebook and I just start to write down random topics or brain dumps into them because I'm not really overthinking it because I'm kind of watching TV or I'm kind of like watching a movie. And so I think there's that part of your brain that overthinks things and that is overcritical of your writing that kind of gets distracted by the television. And so it's actually easier to write while you're watching something. And that's just kind of what works for me. It's one way to turn off like my overly critical brain and just kind of write it and let it flow.